Welcome, everybody, to Soccer 101. My name is Taylor Rockwell. I'm excited to be back with you all once again on the feed to discuss 101 types of things. Graham Ruthven, are we still doing 101 things at this point? It feels like we've maybe exhausted the supply a little bit. Are we about to enter like 201, 202, whatever like, 201, the second level course is?
I like that. Or 102. I'm not entirely sure what we're going to call it. We're still workshopping that. But yeah, I feel like we're maybe evolving Soccer 101 just a little bit, where previously it was, I guess, like a glossary of soccer terms and explaining what those things were. And it feels like now, because we've been doing this for, I believe, over 200 episodes, there's quite a good number of them, yeah. It feels like we should probably evolve it into something a bit more like a discussion. So we'll talk about historical figures or stories that have happened in the past or why things are a certain way. And that's not to say that we won't do sort of more explainer traditional 101 episodes going forward. Those will still be sprinkled in there, but I think we got a taste for it with those with like the league episodes we had running up to the World Cup, which seemed to be very popular. So maybe we'll sprinkle in a couple more league episodes in the 101 feed as well. But yes, today we're going to do a very interesting one. I'm looking forward to this episode, Taylor, because Pogba is such an interesting case. I'm interested in your views on him as a Manchester United fan. He did have the best transfer announcement video of all time, so that's got to be worth something, right? It was all downhill from the Stormzy video.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're talking about the Adidas Stormzy video where my wife still was like, "Wait, which one? Why is the rapper in the Pogba jersey and why is the Pogba in the rapper outfit?" It was a pretty amazing announcement video. And yeah, Graham, like I really like credit to Graham Ruthven for coming up with the kind of idea of maybe we pivot to like somewhat topical, somewhat evergreen discussion points, and that's what I think Soccer 101 could be, because I do love the idea of getting kind of deeper into the meat of a topic, into the history, into the like all aspects of it as much as we can, in a more conversational way, but in a way that also relates to a topic that is both current and then ideally something that people will want to go back and look at as we, I don't know, have more distance from Pogba's career or as he makes another move. We shall see, but that is why we are recording this one, because in early August, a couple weeks ago, or somewhat recently, we've had Paul Pogba with Monaco and then no longer with Monaco, and that was meant to be like Le Renaissance. It's going to be the return of Pogba, the third Pog back, I think.
Yeah, he got the Globe Soccer Comeback of the Year awards, Taylor Rockwell. What? I mean, are we just saying that's worth nothing now? Yes, that is what we're saying.
I guess we are, Graham. I guess we are. But, I mean, it's a very strange place to be in with a player that I thought was going to be one of like generational talents. Like I thought he was going to be up there in the conversation with like Haaland and Mbappe of that transition between Messi and Ronaldo and the new generation. He was going to be this iconic figure for club and country, and in some ways he was more so for country than club.
Yeah.
But now we kind of potentially find ourselves at the end of his career. Maybe there's another move. Maybe there is another renaissance after this one, but it's an interesting point to pause and look back at the career of Paul Pogba, because it has seen some very high ups and some very low downs.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, he was the most expensive player in the world. He joins Manchester United for over £80 million, I think like €105 million in the summer of 2016. And, 10 years is a long time, but even by that measure, a lot has happened to Paul Pogba in those 10 years, where he spends like 5 or 6 years at Manchester United. And then even in the last 4 years, up until him being released by, and you're absolutely right, Taylor, like we try to keep these episodes evergreen, which this will be, but the news hook right now is that Paul Pogba has just been released by Monaco. He signed a 2-year deal last summer. Monaco have ended it early because objectives, this I'm reading from a BBC article here, objectives set by both parties had only been partially achieved. And of course he joined Monaco after a doping suspension he received when he was at Juventus for the second time. We'll talk more about that in this episode. There's an extortion case in there as well involving his brother and childhood friends. So there's a lot to talk about with Paul Pogba, and mixed in all of that is the kind of soccer discussion about him of, well, how good was this guy? I mean, at the time Manchester United paid as much as they did for him, I think he was one of the best midfielders in the world. But I liken it to the discussion around someone like Neymar. I don't think Pogba was quite up to the standard of Neymar. I think Neymar did have a more profound impact on soccer for a while. But with Pogba, there will always be that question mark of, yeah, he was good. At times he was great. He won the World Cup. but it could have been something even more. Yep. And I think that's where the regret is with him.
Yeah, I think at present, at time of recording, I think it probably is a story of regret from my perspective. But it's also just a story of how many things can collide at once to have impact that we didn't see coming. And it reminds me of like the Ted Lasso, Roy Kent, like Isaac's storyline about like, we don't know what's going on with these players' lives and we don't know what's going on with them. And even if they are projecting this outward persona of swagger and confidence and style, there's just a lot going on behind the scenes that, lest we forget they are human, lest we forget they are struggling with human issues. And those human issues can very much become public. And I do think that's a thing that happened with Paul Pogba, who was like just such an, like, it's not iconic, Graham. I'm struggling with the word I want to say because he doesn't end up being an icon. He doesn't
compelling,
end up being iconic.
Captivating, something.
Captivating. I think he's just a fascinating character from basically like the introduction of him to most people was his arrival at Manchester United as a 16-year-old. He arrives from Le Havre Academy in France, where many other talented players have come through. And even his arrival is a little bit controversial because he's moving at 16. There's allegations from the club that he is like tampered with, lured away by Manchester United. Now he goes into this, the footballing furnace and the footballing factory simultaneously that is Man United, known for developing young players and young talents. You could argue if you develop a 16-year-old into an 18-year-old, how much development are you doing versus how much has already happened? But either way, he's a player that it felt like, okay, this could be the next thing, the next kind of generational talent. And then suddenly he's playing in Serie A. And it was a very strange introduction and then first conclusion to his United career.
Yeah, I mean, he's had expectation placed on his shoulders from a very, very young age. Grows up in the Parisian suburbs, which I'm sure a lot of listeners will know is possibly the hottest of soccer hotbeds in terms of development and the number of players that come from that environment. He played for a pretty famous youth team called US Torcy. I'm sure if you heard someone French say that name, they'd say it a lot more convincingly. But this is a team that has also brought through players like Magnus Agliush, who's just signed for PSG. Randall Kolomoani is in there as well. As you say, he goes to Le Havre's youth academy, and it just felt like he was the wonder kid of French football from a very young age. The whole move to Manchester United goes to FIFA court, not actual court, I believe, but ultimately Manchester United are cleared of any wrongdoing, but they do settle with Le Havre, which might be part of why they were cleared. But yeah, from there he catches the eye in Manchester United youth teams. He's part of the team that wins the FA Youth Cup. And then he starts training with the senior team at the age of 16. It's worth keeping in mind that this is not the Manchester United of the last 10 years or 13 years or whatever it is. This is Manchester United in 2009 making Champions League finals and dominating the Premier League under Sir Alex Ferguson. So the fact that he's training with that team was a statement in itself. Sir Alex Ferguson gives Pogba his first team debut in a cup game against Leeds at the start of the 2011-2012 season. And already at that point, Ferguson is facing questions of why are you not using this kid more often? Like, he's having to bat back or bat away a lot of questions from the media. So he faces that media pressure, Ferguson, and that's when Juve come in and offer a contract. And Pogba leaves Manchester United as a free agent. The wheels of that move greased, of course, by his famous/infamous, depending on your perspective, late agent Mino Raiola, who had a reputation, shall we say. And I believe Pogba was very close to Mino Raiola and kind of saw him as a father figure. So there's probably two sides to that story. But yeah, I don't think there was reporting around this time of how, let's just say, Mino Raiola was not on the Christmas card list of Sir Alex Ferguson at this point.
No, most agents were not, it seems.
No.
And Raiola, yeah, like I think it's a things can be two things moment. He can have been a very good and influential and potentially like structure-inducing figure for Paul Pogba. He can also have been a thorn in the side of pretty much every club in Europe, but it seems like he was. And that was a consistent thing for Sir Alex Ferguson at the time. Like we know there's like a Mount Rushmore of footballers that you could put up who fell out with him or were moved on when it felt like they valued themselves more highly than they valued the club. David Beckham is maybe the prime example of that, but you could go with... would you put Van Nistelrooy in there?
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah.
Van
Nistelrooy's on there.
Like Stam. arguably Ronaldo, but I think Ferguson
Roy Keane's maybe the most explosive one. I mean,
Roy
he doesn't move on to, he doesn't really achieve anything after Manchester United. So I guess Ferguson was right, but yeah, that one blew up for real.
Yeah, and I'm wrong to put Ronaldo in there because that was a much more like amicable, pre-planned departure. They seem like they still have a very close relationship. When Portugal win the Euros, like he hugs Ferguson and everything, but Pogba, I think, probably finds his way onto that list because I think there is the agent influence. Then there is the kind of all of the speculation or all of the questions as to why there wasn't more playing time. Why isn't he starting right away? I think is always a thing that is immediately going to rub a manager like Sir Alex Ferguson, really any manager, but Ferguson especially, the wrong way. And it's going to be presumptuous, and it's going to immediately start to create this narrative that like that player is really good and you're not valuing him, and maybe he's bigger than you might realize, and it starts to create expectation. And I think a huge tipping point moment is the unretirement of Paul Scholes, which I remember happening like sort of like out of nowhere. It was just like, oh yeah, Paul Scholes is back and he's playing this weekend. And
I'm sure it was like the morning of a Liverpool or a City game, and it was like Paul Scholes was in the lineup after 6 months. I love that story.
But it was such a like I was in Turkey at the time, and I remember a friend of mine messaging to be like, Scholes is starting, and I was like, yeah, like it's Paul Scholes. Of course he starts. Of course he starts. And it took me like 5 minutes to be like, wait, he retired. What's happening now? And it was very confusing. I think it was especially confusing to Paul Pogba, who at the time was already feeling like he should have gotten more minutes. Now this guy's unretired and he's coming back in and he's starting over me too.
This is also the time that like Raphael and John O'Shea are starting in central midfield for Manchester United under Fergie.
Both of them. Yes. Good call. And so I think that's when maybe other inquiries start to come in. That's when Juve's initial offer comes in. I believe United, once they realize he is intent on leaving, do try to match that offer. But then there's the concerns about the agent fees and what Raiola is wanting as a commission. Ferguson not okay with that. And ultimately, Pogba walks away. And I think in the moment, it was a story, but not a mega story. It was here's this talent but he's been allowed to walk. You know, is this another case of Ferguson valuing the club over the individual and wanting to make sure that the heads were in the right space? But to your point, it's also a Manchester United behemoth under Sir Alex Ferguson. And so there's a feeling of like he knows what he's doing. He's a knight. He's been there for forever. So yeah, maybe this guy was good, but Ferguson must know that he has other options and that Pogba maybe isn't up to the standard. And so it was a story in the moment, to my understanding and to my memory. It becomes a much bigger story that following season when Pogba explodes at Juventus and just becomes this central figure and this captivating figure at that.
Yeah, and from that, he and Raiola surely feel a huge amount of vindication. So Manchester United, I understand from their point why they were stung. Ferguson wasn't used to losing players not on his terms. Like even the Ronaldo deal, he gets an extra year. The story there is Ronaldo's going the year before. He says, right, give me another season and then I'll sell you for a huge fee. Man United get a record fee for Ronaldo. And 80 million at that time was, I know that's like half an Elliot Anderson now, but 80 million back then was a huge fee. And so it was still on Ferguson's terms. It was still on Manchester United's terms. Pogba going to Juventus was absolutely not on his terms. And so that's why they were so stung by that. But Pogba goes to Juventus, similar to Manchester United's. This was a Juventus team who were dominating Italian football at the time. They were making Champions League or they would go on to make Champions League finals with Pogba in the team. And he goes into that side and immediately earns a reputation for being one of the best central midfielders in the world. Alongside, it was that midfield three of Andrea Pirlo. Was it Claudio Marchisio? Who is a proper like streets won't forget footballer. I never hear his name being mentioned, but he was quality for a while, and it was that midfield three of Arturo Vidal in that team as well. So there were like proper midfielders, and Pogba, even alongside someone like Andrea Pirlo, different sort of midfielders, of course, but Pogba looked like the pick of the bunch for a couple seasons. He was explosive. He was goal scoring. There were a couple of goals he scored which were just unbelievable. There's one that he scores, and the camera's right. It must have been a replay. It wasn't an A camera, but the camera's right behind him. And the swaz on this shot that comes in from outside the post, and I think it hits like the bar or something and goes in. It was just a ridiculous goal, and he was producing moments like that on a weekly basis for a Juventus team that was one of the best sides in the world at that point.
Yeah, and that's where I think to understand where things go wrong, this is all very much hindsight. There's no way of knowing that in the moment because that Juve team were so electric. I think they win 4 Serie A in the row with Pogba there. They make the Champions League final, as you mentioned, losing to an incredibly good Barcelona team. But within that team, like, they are dominating Serie A. They are a possession-dominant team. They are controlling games. And so, like, you're not asking as much individually of him, which then allows him to shine as an individual almost, because he has fewer responsibilities. Not no responsibilities, but fewer. And you look at that midfield, when it would be the sort of, like, compact diamond midfield that Allegri really enjoyed with that Juve team, it would be Pirlo at the base, controlling possession, controlling tempo. You'd have Marchisio as your sort of 8 who can get box to box, but is also technically, I think of him as like a slightly slower, slightly bigger prime Nico Barella. And then I think of Arturo Vidal as the player that, like, I once answered a question of if you could draft any player into every position in a team, who would it be? It was Arturo Vidal, but he was tenacious and ball winning and did so much ground covering and so much defensive work that you have, like, your 3 midfield roles essentially filled there, which allows you to have Paul Pogba, who can just kind of like dunk on some kids if he wants to, but also play a simple pass if he wants to, but also go on a dribble if he wants to. And that puts him into this position where he can shine and look exceptional and be exceptional, but it maybe also papers over some of the deficiencies in his game, such as they were.
Yeah, and then, he's dropped into a Manchester United team, which had like a wasteland of a central midfield, and it was like, right, you do everything, and that's where things started to fall apart for Paul Pogba. Yeah. But yeah, I do wonder, like, that's a huge sliding door moments for him, where at the end of his time at Juventus, it was clear that he was moving on. It was clear he was going to go for an absolutely giant transfer fee. I think everyone thought he was going to go to Real Madrid. That seemed like the most obvious place for him to go. They'd been linked with him for like 18 months, and then Manchester United come in with this huge offer. They're looking to make a splash. They've just hired Mourinho when Mourinho is still at least a semblance of the old Mourinho still. His last club had won the Premier League with Chelsea. They'd also spent big on Henrik Mkhitaryan, who was a Bundesliga Player of the Year with Dortmund the year before. They brought in Zlatan, of course. As well, and Pogba was the centrepiece of this. Manchester United are going to be a serious team again, a serious club again. We've got the special one in charge, and we've got the most expensive player in the world in central midfield. But I feel like whether it was Ed Woodward, whether it was Jose Mourinho, I think a lot of it is on Mourinho. There was just a misunderstanding of the player that Paul Pogba was at that time, right down to them giving him the number 6 shirt and expecting him almost to be a kind of like a pace setter, like a Busquets or a Xavi, or I don't even really know what they thought he was. But you're absolutely right, Taylor. At Juventus, he had the structure around him, and at Manchester United, he had absolutely none of that, and so that completely changed the framing for him.
I think there are a number of different factors, obviously, that go into his United tenure going the way it does. But it does start with that arrival, and we'll talk about the announcement, we'll talk about the hype. But I want to talk about, I think, the misunderstanding of Paul Pogba and how representative it is of that next iteration of Manchester United following Sir Alex Ferguson. Because you can make an argument that, like, maybe he wasn't up to the standard, maybe there was a chip on the shoulder or an ego there, maybe there was the agent, maybe Ferguson just got it wrong. There could be any number of answers, but it wasn't sort of a, like, that was an obvious mistake. Like, it probably in hindsight you wanted to keep him around, but does he become the player he does if he's just kind of treading water at Manchester United? Probably not. So I think, like, that one is more defensible, but then when you bring him back, it feels very much like the new people in charge trying to be like, see, we're righting the wrongs of the old, and perceiving that as a wrong, but also this is going to fix it. We've got the big name manager, we've got the big name striker, we've got the big name former player who's going to come back and make us champions. And that is kind of what I will remember him for in that second stint, is that, like, for me, a Man United supporter, I remember being like, well, that's that. They're winning the title again. Like, that one guy is going to do it because he is, like it's worth pausing to say, like, he is a huge person. Like, he is a large man, like, in terms of his height and his frame, but then he still has, like, a lanky dribbling ability. He has some speed. He was, like, really impossible to knock off the ball because he was so big. And so he just comes in and you're, like, literally dropping a huge human into a huge hole in the middle. And I think there was just an assumption of, like, we bring in enough talent, that'll do it, right? That solves everything. We don't really need to figure out how it works. They're all just good enough to make it work. And so I think he is dropped into a situation where largely it's like, well, we have you now. We've had this video. Everyone's hyped. Here we go. And then it goes the way it does. And it's really unfun football where no one seems to have a clear idea of what they're supposed to be doing at any given moment because you have a ton of egos and personalities and styles crammed together under Jose Mourinho.
Yeah, Mourinho he never understood Pogba. I think the only manager really at Manchester United who sort of grasped what he was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So that season...
Can I ask you that question? Did you brought it up? Like, is Deschamps the manager who got him the most? Is it Allegri? Like, who do you think is the manager that, like, if you asked for a clear understanding of who Pogba is, what his strengths are and weaknesses are, they're going to give it to you?
Probably Juventus, first stint Juventus Pogba.
Yeah.
I think at club level, certainly that's an easy answer is peak Pogba. Longevity, Deschamps in France obviously got him. I mean, 2018 World Cup, you could argue Pogba was I know he doesn't get the official award, but arguably he was the player of that tournament. I think he got the man of the match in the final, which obviously France won, 4-2 against Croatia. A final where he was up against one of the best central midfield units in international soccer history, and Pogba shone in that game. So, yeah, France maybe got I feel like France got the best of him as it's kind of similar to the Mbappe situation. It just felt like he was happiest in the French national team, got the best out of him as a personality and a character, and also it helped that they had world class players around him to really give him a platform in a similar way that Juventus did. But at Manchester United, Solskjaer was the only one who. It was just as simple as Solskjaer understood that he was an attack-minded player. Like he wasn't this deep-lying pace setter. And that's first season that Solskjaer comes in is his best goal-scoring season. Not just at Manchester United, his entire career was that Solskjaer season. I think he scores like 13 league goals. But it was all too fleeting. And then as his career progresses at Manchester United, injuries became a bigger and bigger issue as well. And ultimately he ends up leaving in the summer of 2022.
Yeah, I want to go back to Mourinho for a moment because, like, the injuries, you're right, we'll talk about those, but I think that first season with Jose there, like, it felt, as I said, coming in, like, okay, they've got everything, they've got all the obvious things, Moyes wasn't the right guy, it is Mourinho, that's who it should have been from the jump, they've brought in the big talents, they brought back the former player, and then it just doesn't look good, and it never looks cohesive. And so, like, I think, like, right away, there's just a vulnerability to players who are expected to be at this level, and then they just kind of don't meet that level or expectation. That suddenly it's like, well, are they as good? And then you start getting, like, he's getting his hair done, and he's more concerned about fashion, and he's always wearing sunglasses, and you start to get the influx of all of these other things that don't really matter. But if things are already kind of sour or not going as well, they're going to, like, add a lot of negativity around it and make the situation harder. And I think, like, he's also a really good example of how careful players have to be in the choices they make, because on paper in the moment, this felt like a slam dunk. It felt like a no-brainer. Here we go, Manchester United back to where they were. But then you look at it, and it's Ed Woodward sort of still trying to figure out how to be in a post-Ferguson world. And I would say largely still failing at that. And then it's Jose Mourinho, like, aware that this is, like, maybe his last gig. Strange to say, as we are on the eve of him starting his second stint as Real Madrid manager. But, like, the way things have been going for him, it felt like, okay, like, he's had the fallout at Chelsea, he's had the fallout at Madrid, he's had the fallout at Chelsea again. Like, maybe now, like, it's gonna be like he's gonna mellow and it's all gonna click and he's gonna be there for forever. But I think the pressure mounts, and I think he starts to feel like this isn't going the way it's supposed to. I can feel the tide turning, and it does seem like that is the one very clearly toxic managerial relationship that Pogba had at Manchester United, where I think there's reports that, like, Mourinho calls him a virus in a post game like team talk. But then there's just a lot of negativity. He's dropped from the squad. He's played out of position.
For McTominay, that's how Scott McTominay gets his start.
There you go, man.
And then even stuff like McTominay ends up. Do you remember Mourinho created at the Manchester United Player of the Year awards at the end of the season? He created, like, this new award, like Manager's Player of the Year, and he gave it to Scott McTominay. But he wasn't really giving an award to Scott McTominay. No. That was an FU to Paul Pogba. Yeah, and
exactly.
So, yeah, it became really toxic.
And so then, like, Mourinho departs, and then Ole takes over, and it is better vibes. But that's what I mean when I say it feels like they're sort of like, wait, but is he, like, it seemed kind of dysfunctional. He seemed like maybe he wasn't as interested. A lot of that, I think, is media narrative. Like, and then he falls out with the manager. So is he the bad guy, or was Mourinho the bad guy? But there's then an idea that goes back to the Ferguson reason for not keeping him of, no, this is a guy who thinks he's bigger than the club and the manager and will actively work to get the manager forced out so he can get someone in whom he likes in this case, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I don't think that's a fair brush to paint him with, because I think it was a situation that was put upon him, Pogba. But we then do see the good statistical season with Ole, but then we also start to see those injuries piling up. We start to see maybe some lack of consistency in him. And then I think as the team starts to break apart a little bit under Ole, it also feels like he is not making the team better. He is a part of a team that is sort of slowly sinking, and he himself is not really helping to extricate United from the situation in which they found themselves.
I mean, Pogba's second spell at Manchester United is just so difficult to work out and decipher. Like, even just down to, was he good for Manchester United? Because he did play, I've got it in my notes here, he did play 226 games. He scored 39 goals, which for a midfielder is not a terrible scoring rate, especially when he was played deep for such a long time. He kind of won a couple trophies there, which in the post-Ferguson age is, not a small achievement as a Manchester United player. But yet at the same time, they're not building a statue of him outside Old Trafford anytime soon, and it became so difficult to work out what was the ugly side of the British media. I thought at the time there was a lot of coverage from the media, particularly the right-wing press, that was tinged with racism around Paul Pogba, and so that was toxic. But at the same time, there were things that were fair to criticise him for, and we've maybe seen that these last few years, where more accusations of sort of like low training levels, and obviously the doping ban, the suspension just muddies the water further, and it has the ban reduced from 4 years, which essentially would have been the end of his career, to 18 months, because it wasn't intentional. There's so much around Paul Pogba that makes it difficult to kind of not just work out the player. I actually think that's the easiest thing to work out, is Paul Pogba the player, but Paul Pogba the character, the personality, that's the thing that's difficult.
Like, I will be honest here, and I think it's honesty. I hope it's not me being a bad person, but like, I still don't know about the doping thing, because I can see a reality in which a guy who had all of the hype he had and like all of the ability, played at the highest levels he did, and then just starts to pick up injuries consistently. Like, everything I've heard from former players is that once you start getting those injuries that just keep reappearing, it is crushing, because you might think you're back to full fitness, but one sprint, one day in a warm-up or post-match, or right as you subbed on and you've pulled something again and now you're out and the rhythm is gone, and it just becomes so frustrating and almost like heartbreaking. And I can see a scenario in which players would look for alternative treatments or new ways of dealing with medical issues. And it's a fine line, I think. We've seen this with athletes from the Tour de France to the NBA, where they're getting experimental treatments and trying new things, and then if it ends up getting flagged, there are explanations for it. Like, I can see a world in which a player with the hype he had, the expectation he had, and then the frustration and sadness with the injuries, trying to find new ways of dealing with it. I don't know if that's true, but I think it kind of all folds into the narrative that, like, he's a flash personality who was one of the best in the world, but then also maybe was a little bit careless in the way he handled himself, but also maybe that's a media construction. It's really difficult to know who he is and what he was at his core, because I think there were so many narratives pulling in so many directions.
Yeah, and yet, despite that uncertainty around who Paul Pogba actually is, when he signs for Monaco last summer, I'm kind of rooting for him. Like, it's similar. It's similar to the. There's something similar in like the Mourinho. Despite everything with Mourinho going into Real Madrid, I'm like, oh man, it'd be magic if Jose Mourinho was back. And it's the same with Pogba. Obviously, it hasn't panned out. He's now been released by Monaco. But last summer, he comes out and he states he wants to make the France World Cup squad, which obviously doesn't happen. He's nowhere near the France World Cup squad. He's barely near the Monaco squad for a lot of the season for one reason or another. But when he signs, I'm thinking to myself, it would be great if we got a Pogba renaissance. And we actually got the player that we all thought he was going to be earlier in his career. Obviously, that's not going to happen now, and it does feel like we're kind of into end days of his career, where maybe there's a move or two left in him, but probably not at the highest level. So it just kind of makes me a bit sad now, I guess.
Okay, I have a question along those lines. I'm going to save it for the end, because it is more of a concluding question than it is a right now question.
Okay.
What I want to talk about right now is like the other stuff that we've mentioned or alluded to aside from the doping ban, which it sounds like in the end it's like it was prescribed to him by a Florida doctor.
Yeah.
And that the like side effect that was adjudged to have been the doping violation, I believe I'm correct in saying like the conclusion was can only actually affect like women taking the medication and couldn't have actually produced additional testosterone or whatever it was meant to do. So like there is a reason why the doping ban is overturned and why it's contested from the outset. But I think it speaks to the larger like chaos that is unfolding at that point in his career because things have gone poorly in his return to Juve at this point. Maybe he just never should return places. Is that what we've learned? Well, I guess that's what he tried with Monaco, and it didn't go so well. So I don't know what the next step is. But it's not going well. He's injured a lot. Then there's the publicly there's the doping case, but I think privately is when the extortion situation that had already happened. And essentially, from my understanding, from March until September of 2022, he's extorted by a criminal gang that includes his own brother, as you said, Graham, who demanded 13 million euros in compensation for protecting him at points in his career. That sounds an awful lot like a protection racket, something the mafia likes to run. And it basically is like him being held at gunpoint, him being extorted by friends and family with whom you would assume he thought he was close and safe. And so, like, and I think he talks about how he felt like that, like, I should just retire. Nothing is going right. And this is right around when he gets the doping violation. And so it's just a good illustration, I think, of what's happening on and off the pitch. Like, during the same stretch, it's his body and his career falling apart. He's betrayed by his own family. There's public blackmail. There's gunpoint threats. I believe some of those threats include allegations that he had, like, hired witch doctors and practiced the occult. And it's still, at the same time, like, while he is rehabbing from injury and getting criticized globally in the media, like, I can't imagine the amount of, like, pressure and negativity surrounding him. And I don't know how you get out of that. So it's a credit to him that he does try to fight back, in my opinion, and does try to have another go of it at Monaco after the doping ban. But it feels to me, having not watched the one game in which he started against Metz, that we're kind of at a point where the injuries, the kind of time off, have caught up with him. And I also wonder, like, how do you still have hunger at that point? If you've missed the World Cup now, that was maybe a good focal point. But after that, does he want to go run around like Audi Field in August? I doubt it. Like, I struggle to see a scenario where he finds a place where he can play like happy, comfortable football and look good. It feels like he's like, I kind of don't want him to keep going at this point, as sad as that is, because I worry about him showing up kind of like James with Minnesota. And it's just like, he's there. Like, we're using you to sell tickets, and we hope you can still kick a ball. And I think for where he was and what he was at his prime, I don't know if I want to see that Pogba anymore.
Yeah. Just firstly on the extortion case, even that is difficult to know truly what the story is, because it is his brother Matthias Pogba, who, by the way, I've interviewed. He played for Partick Thistle for a year. It wasn't very good for Partick Thistle.
Did you pay him to do that?
No, I didn't. I kept my wallet in my pocket, thankfully. But yeah, weirdly interviewed Matthias Pogba. He wasn't very good. But even the extortion case, I read Pogba after the case was over being like, well, my brother was kind of forced to do it. I'm like, everything about Paul Pogba is just difficult to know truly what the story is. But you're right, Taylor. Like, right now, he's been linked with Inter Miami in the past. I would be shocked if Inter Miami, given where they are, signs Paul Pogba. DC United are another team that have been linked, hence your Audi Field reference. That feels more in the ballpark of a signing DC United might make, but I honestly don't know what he's got left in his legs. I mean, in 4 years since leaving Manchester United, keep in mind he left Manchester United amid injuries after injury, so it wasn't like he was playing a whole lot towards the end of his time at Manchester United. But in 4 years, he's played 160 minutes for Juve and 115 minutes for Monaco. This guy's barely a soccer player anymore. So I would stay away from. I definitely wouldn't be giving him anything close to DP money. The only argument would be you do the James Rodriguez thing and you say, look, we'll take a punt on this guy. We're not going to pay him a huge amount and we'll just see what comes out the other side. But I don't. I mean, he's 33 now. He's not played in 4 years. I kind of feel like Pogba's career is essentially over now.
Yeah, I mean, like, in a vacuum, if I didn't know what had happened in the last stint, if you were like, what's an ideal landing spot for Paul Pogba now, I would have said, like, probably like a French club where there isn't as much pressure, like maybe a Monaco where there's still a good amount of exposure, but there's not as much like hype or expectation behind it, and then that goes as poorly as it does. So that's where, like, I hope he does keep playing if he wants to, and if he can find a way to have good form and have a good run of games. like I think that would be very fun. What I wonder, Graham, and what you made me wonder earlier is like, is he like on the, I'm going to call it the Balotelli scale. Is he number one on the Balotelli scale with Balotelli just behind? Because I believe you and I did another 101 episode not too long ago about the career of Mario Balotelli, why he was so captivating, why people paid such interest to him. But I think that was in the context of him suddenly having gotten a random move to Serie A again, and like, could that be the kickstart? And it feels very similar, of like both of us being like, probably not, but like maybe that'd be really fun because he was a great player and could have been this next level player, but didn't quite reach it. I think Pogba reaches higher heights than Balotelli for a longer period of time, but it still feels like there's a lot of similarity there in my mind.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of overlap between Balotelli and Pogba, of course, and the fact they're in Manchester around the same time as well. Same agent, I believe. Mina Raiola is Balotelli's agent, I believe. So yeah, a lot of similarities there. I think Paul Pogba, you referenced it there, Taylor, like he reached higher heights. I think with Balotelli, there's a greater question of like, oh man, what could have been with this guy? And I think there might be even more chaos around Balotelli in his career, which is saying something because there's a fair degree around Paul Pogba. But Pogba did have, like, as I said, man of the match in a World Cup final. He had a handful of games for Manchester United where he was the player that they thought they had signed. I remember one, Taylor, you might be able to jog my memory a little bit on this one, but there was a Manchester derby. Man City were leading. I think they were going to win the Premier League title against Manchester United in a derby. And then all of a sudden, Pogba just turns it on, and I think Man United either draw or they win the game with Pogba scoring a couple goals.
Yeah.
And
I remember that moment.
That was like, wow, that's the guy who can just completely dominate a game. Man City, best team in the Premier League at the time. It was a Guardiola team.
Yep.
That was another sort of sliding doors moment. Was Man City were the other team that were linked with Pogba. Guardiola apparently was a massive fan of Paul Pogba to such an extent that even when Paul Pogba is about to leave Manchester United, there are pretty substantiated reports that Man City considered signing him, almost taking a punt and on just like putting him in their squad and see what he can produce. Obviously, they didn't end up doing that, but yeah, I just wonder if in 2016, if you drop Paul Pogba into another more functional team and club, I just wonder if we're having a completely different discussion about him right now.
Especially if he's already has Raiola as a semi-father figure or a figure who protects him. He goes to Man City and Pep. You would assume Pep takes over that mantle quite a little bit. And it does make me wonder, do they find a new level? Does he find a new level of consistency and stability? And does he become a Ballon d'Or winning player or a consistently Ballon d'Or winning player? As it is, Graham, I think if we're talking about how we remember him, or maybe what our memories of him will be, that is a great one to point out, the game you're talking about, because I remember that moment, and I remember it being one of those moments in recent Manchester United fandom of wait, maybe, there it is, that's what it was supposed to be, it could all happen again. But I think I'll remember him, this is my attempt to summarize, as an immense talent undermined by chronic inability to stay fit, especially in prime moments when it would have really helped, compounded by media scrutiny, and then a career-defining doping ban that takes 2 years out of his career, that it never allows him to prove that he had been the player that we thought he would be in the beginning. And I think I personally will remember him as being sort of representative of the last time, at club level, I saw a single player that could convince me that things are going to get better. That he really is. I remember him being dropped in, and it was kind of like when United go out and sign Tevez, and it just felt that's ridiculous. They're just going to win everything now because they have even more talent. It felt for sure that's it. That's the return of the Kings, and then very much not the case. And I think that set the standard for what was to come under Ed Woodward for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth recapping. He was the most expensive player in the world, which that's only happened twice for a Premier League. For all the riches and wealth of the Premier League, it's only happened twice where a Premier League club has set that record. Once in 1996 when Newcastle signed Alan Shearer, and then Manchester United signing Pogba. So I remember it as I'm not a Manchester United fan, but I remember it as a seminal moment. I kind of remember where I was when I saw that video for the first time, and I was like, oh man, this is cool. With the Stormzy rap and the shirt and the hashtag.
I still watch it. And you'll see that on YouTube. It will be who's here in 2026 is the top comment with a lot of upvotes.
Yeah, Pog back, right? That was the hashtag. So there was a lot of excitement, which obviously did not pan out the way that we.
Couple young kings,
thought,
Graham. Couple young kings.
Couple young kings.
Starts.
Yeah. That was cool. Is there anyone Man United could do that with now? I don't. As much as like Carlos Balibas, maybe a good signing. I'm not entirely sure he deserves the Stormzy treatment, but
because Stormzy's Mancunian as well, right? Or is at least a Manchester United fan?
He's a Manchester United fan, but I think he's from London. Don't tell Ryan; he'll mock you for that.
That's fair. I deserve that. Well, we'll do another 101 on Stormzy and his background and footballing inspiration.
Sure.
But for now, Graham, thank you for taking probably longer than you expected talking about Paul Pogba. I wonder if when you tried to
actually
move
not
his
at all
Man United twice. Okay.
I knew this would be a longer one.
He's just like, dude, like I think I have one of the softest spots of it, like for any player for him. Like I loved that guy, and I was so happy when he came back. I rooted for him at Juve. I thought it was awesome when he was balling out. Like I love Sir Alex Ferguson, and I didn't criticize him for the choice. But at the same time, I was happy to see Pogba go and thrive. I was so ecstatic to see him come back. It just felt like all the swagger was back, and I hope for the best for him. I would, if he's playing at Audi Field, I will be there, and I will probably be watching with a grimace on my face for most of the game, but I will be there because I do love me some Paul Pogba. I love me some Graham Ruthven, and I love me some Soccer 101. Graham Ruthven, thank you for suggesting a tweak to the format for the 102, 202, 201, whatever it might be, the intermediate edition of Soccer 101.
Yeah, if any listeners have an idea on the new title, let us know. And also let us know, given what we said at the start of the episode of how we're kind of evolving 101, let us know if you've got any subject ideas, anything you'd like us to talk about, whether that's like a historical game or story or player or a question, I guess, that you'd like answered that has a kind of like wider historical context. Yeah, please get in touch and let us know.
Any and all questions welcome. From like, why isn't the ball orange to why is the ball white and other stuff that isn't about the ball. More than welcome. For now, thank you all again for listening. We'll talk to you again very soon.